The theme for this period of time with you is mindfulness, and will also include matters of the heart. And just like to speak just 2 or 3 minutes about the general background, then go from there to first-hand our experience, and then after the talk, invitation for inquiry if anybody wishes to come one-to-one to take a seat, question and answers, groups, etc. As I mentioned when I had the privilege of coming here yesterday, that I brought some books with me, my propaganda, you could say, and I'll put them out there. If anybody wants to drop a $5 in the bag, it's extremely welcome. And if you haven't got any money, just take a book, and I'll walk back to Titmus. So anyway, let's talk about the. That's not true. Let's talk about the theme a little bit here. A little bit of background first. Amongst the immeasurable number of discoveries of the Buddha, one was the significance of what it is to be a genuinely and authentically mindful human being. He dismissed much of the belief systems, worship, and dropped the extremities between a theistic view of life, or of a creator and destroyer, toward and a materialistic consumerist way of life, and endeavored instead to explore and find for us as human beings an authentic middle ground which has a number of threads running through it, and one of them, important, not centrally important, but important, is mindfulness. And spoke with unwavering interest, one might say, on the powerful benefits of being a really mindful, conscious, attentive human being to both inner experience and the outer world, which we have access to through eyes, ears, nose, tongue and touch, the means for access to the immediate. And he said, in this world, what I see, hear, smell, taste and touch, feel and think, what I am conscious of, there is exceptional and remarkable opportunity to discover a great deal, to find out a lot more than what we think or what we have felt previously. And the key, one of them, to that being possible and available to us is to be mindful. We are usually, with our mindfulness, to a greater level degree, usually with our mindfulness, we think it, and it is an important factor, a way of remembering there. I mentioned yesterday my daughter said to me on more than one occasion, "Dad, it's unbelievable that you teach mindfulness." And so she knows from first-hand experience. So sometimes, as a small example, in the conventions of mindfulness, before I go out at home, I, generally speaking, have to remember 4 things. Keys, it helps because one wants to get back in. What else? The mobile phone there, and some money and something else. Oh, and glasses. The glasses is for those of us of a certain age. And if one goes out and gets down the street, or one's still wearing one's slippers or something, I think, God, I'm so unmindful. I need to be more mindful, etc. So mindfulness is a way of keeping conscious on the practical things, and definitely has a use for that. And we've all complained to ourselves or to others about being so bloody unmindful, etc. But mindfulness not only has the capacity to remember in the practical and the detail, but it also is a way as well of tracking what's going on. In other words, when an issue arises for us, which is problematic, which is agitated, which we're caught up, obsessing about, not being very clear about, that hasn't happened out of the blue. That hasn't happened because of some circumstance, other than one factor is I haven't been mindful of the process of what's been going on, and now I experience this. So sometimes when you and I are unmindful, when you and I as men and women on the earth are neglectful, we suddenly get the fruit of that being unmindful, that not being clear about, that difficulty in observing. So mindfulness gives some support to the inner life, and it functions and works for us as a certain stabilizing factor, a calming factor there. Mindfulness also is a function for us which applies to the present moment, giving us the opportunity just to notice and see more. Even in just being in the good Dharma Parlour here and elsewhere, if one has the quiet intention, I'm going to be more mindful today. I'm going to be more conscious. I'm going to notice more. I'm going to listen more. I'm going to eat the food more mindfully, instead of as we often English do. We treat the eating of food in the same way we treat petrol going into the tank of the car. Just shovel it in. More mindfulness of those details of life brings more consciousness and a closer connection and intimacy with things. And the Buddha realized the importance of this and therefore advocated it strongly. Men and women who are more mindful in daily life with the present moment, with what's past and what's going on, will realize and discover more, will open up things more through a natural process of being a conscious, present human being. And if I may say, when let me just have the mindful of a dry throat here. Devon water. The good waterman, bit of advertising, we're used to it, comes round every couple of weeks and brings a bucket load of water for us, precious. When in different circumstances and in giving attention to mindfulness, to its credit, the Theravada tradition has, in the Vipassana monasteries, and if I may say, lived in one for 3 years in the early part of the I nearly said century. I'm getting old. Early part of the 70s. That it was a centre, a monastery, where books were banned. I remember my old teacher, when I was teaching in Bodh Gaya, he's now gone from this world, came to see me, and he heard that I had written some books. I tell you, he was not pleased. He regarded books as a real distraction to practice. It was all practice, practice, practice. And in the monastery there, the observation of mindfulness, not only we learnt, both the monks and the nuns, and there are some 150 to 200 of us, about our inner life, but the mindfulness helped to get the sense and sensitivities of other human beings. In other words, if we're really conscious of each other, we'll notice more, we'll pick up more, we'll see more, we'll ask more, we'll question more. And that would go on a lot in the monastery. And remember, just to give you a couple of small examples, one of the old monks who we revered, he was a genuinely loving, mindful human being who brought the heart and mindfulness really together. And he did, I also did with him a lot, standing meditation every day under the tree in the grounds of the monastery from midday till 3 in the afternoon. Every day he did this. When the monsoons came, then he would use a small hall there. And the monks, his name was Poor Longboat, loved this monk very, very much. And they said to him, "Oh, when you die, when you pass from this world, why don't you, before you pass them, why don't you teach?" And he said, "I have nothing to teach. What can I teach? I can only teach standing meditation." So that's all that I can do. And one of the other monks was asked, why don't you teach? And he said, "I'll be a better teacher when I'm dead." So he said, "No need to burn me. Just stick the formula in." And he said, "And I'll bring more mindfulness to your life about how impermanent things are." And he died after I left the monastery. And when I went back to the monastery, it's true, the corpse is sitting in a chair in the grounds of the monastery. And I didn't know he died. And I walked past, and the thought arose in my mind, "You don't look very well at all." There. But it was a daily reminder there of change, of impermanence, of the transitions of life, and therefore being mindful of arising and passing, Buddha's words, coming and going, birth and death, beginning and ending, start and finishing. Because if we're not mindful, any issue and problem which you and I have about life will involve, to some degree or other, about what is arising, about what is staying, or about what is passing, or about what is not arising, not staying, or not passing. If you can think of a problem in life which is not about arising, staying, or passing, Om to you. Om to you. Think about it there. And one of the old monks, forgive the nostalgia, anyway, one of the old monks, I love this, he was 94 years of old, very serious, one of those really serious meditators. They're around, you see them on Goenka retreats. Apologies. Anyway, so he, and my retreats as well, and very, 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 very serious. And the monks gathered around him, the younger monks, and I had blessings of a translator. And younger monks were called Long Pi, means younger brother, right? Younger monk. And the older monks were called Long Po, older brother. So we sat round, and one of the monks said to him quite directly, "Look, Long Po, there's no point in thinking about the past. Past is gone, just clinging. No point in going over the past, just be nostalgia. And you're 94, so you haven't got a future anyway." So there's certain bluntness in the tradition, I have to say, with these things. But when your mind wanders, when you're not in the present moment and your mind wanders, what does it wander to? And this very serious monk looked up, he smiled sweetly, and he said, "Sex." I thought to myself, wow, that is one cool monk. And after that, I had a completely different picture of this very serious monk, I have to say. All right. So in the area activity of mindfulness, when it landed in the West, so to speak, and genuinely brought by monks and nuns, of course, and Dharma teachers and meditation teachers, etc., it was received, I think one could say, with a certain open-heartedness, partly because it gave us the tools some of the tools to really work with our issues. And quite often, but not always of course, much of the emphasis in working with ourselves, where that was necessary, much of it, until the last generation or two, was very much either one, more serious things, was medication, and sometimes important and necessary, and the other, as we know, talking therapy. And the communication of the therapist with her or his client. And sometimes some specific practices in a particular way. And mindfulness, as it were, reached and touched for many, and I have heard many lovely voices on this, in a way in which the direction of the mindfulness was such, you, us, we, can practice and apply this in any situation. Every event in life is worthy of attention, is worthy of focus, is worthy of looking at our responses to. And therefore, in the 4 primary postures, sitting, walking, standing and reclining, with each of them, you and I, we can apply mindfulness, really feel the body through, feel what we're feeling, look at thoughts and views and their influence, know what a clear consciousness is all about, and every single circumstance we can apply that. And a whole swath of workshops, coaches, teachers, facilitators, mindfulness consultants has got established, and it's got, some of you will know, extraordinarily widespread. And that shows itself these days. Remember one of my older students, John Kabat-Zinn, who's an important voice in the movement, and others, went to hospitals, and they said to people in hospitals, either before operation, post-operative, or with pain, which the doctors could not handle or deal with, and initially, in the basement of the hospital, men and women were going, they were doing mindfulness courses, mindfulness training, and suddenly found a certain inner empowerment to deal with their pain, so that, as the Buddha commented, there isn't the doubling up of the pain. That means pain in the body, and then the mind's reaction to that pain, which implodes on that, the reaction being fear, anxiety, worry, despair, depression. For some, the transformative experience was not only freeing the mind up from pain about the condition of the body, but in some cases, even the body pain going out as well. And suddenly, the medical profession in Worcester, Massachusetts, said, wow, it's amazing, this works. And it began to spread, and now it's in businesses, it's in prisons, it's a whole branch of psychology, etc. And all of that is to the credit of the leaders and the participants and the practitioners, and saying, let's bring that into the daily life. I sometimes read, and it makes me laugh, it said, like everything that comes out of the dear old cousins on the other side of the pond, mindfulness, I've read it more than once, was discovered more than once in America 30 years ago. Excuse me, 2,600 years ago in India, etc. But we'll forgive them for their naivety. So, in this movement and the expressions and explorations of mindfulness, it is important, and I'll give yet another monk story, to ensure that the connection of heart to mindfulness is there. And what I mean by that, if you're just sitting in meditation, you're just walking mindfully and slowly around Buddhafield, you're really fully attentive in a conversation to somebody else or in a group, is there the inner space inside to check and ask, while being really mindful and attentive in the moment of just walking or just sitting or just in the silence, as that great song asks, where is the love? Where is the love? And if that in some way or other is forgotten or neglected, the mindfulness, and it's a problem in the Buddhist tradition, the mindfulness will become terribly serious, terribly dry, rather controlling, and it's missing the deep, and the deep must embrace and must include the heart and joy and love. And to give you an example, only because this story has gone on in monasteries for something like 1,500 years, and it started off and it gets passed on through the monasteries. And the story is, a monk was walking along the track in Sri Lanka, 5th or 6th century, mindfully. Another one of these deadly serious monks, very mindful. And walking slowly and mindfully, he was on the begging round, getting the food there. And suddenly, along the track, came this amazingly, running along the track, beautiful woman, sensual, young, passionate, there laughing and running, and she saw the monk and gave him a huge smile. There. And he just looked up, carried on. A couple of minutes later, a young guy comes running down the track, and he says, "Oh, Bhikkhu," it means monk, monk, did you see this amazingly sensual, passionate, beautiful woman run by? And the monk looks up with his moment-to-moment mindfulness, and he said, "No, I just saw a set of teeth go by." I mean, it's a sad story, really, isn't it? So sometimes the mindfulness gets rather dry because we've lost access to the heart. And mindfulness is a doorway. It's not an end result for men and women to achieve, "Oh, I am mindful." It's a way of being receptive, as I said, to the inner, and therefore it must include this wonderful liberating agent, which is called the heart, which is called love, which is called gratitude or appreciation or kindness or friendship or compassion, something to emerge out of the deep. And this pointer of mindfulness points and includes and embraces the movement and expression and receptivity to the heart. And in its very, very movement of that, something can move within us, which then finds some way of expression, some communication in the daily life. Another sip. Among the different areas of application of mindfulness, one of the important ones, they're all important, but one of the important ones is the relationship to the body. And how very easy, and religions know this, I ought to know this well enough, that there can be an original message which goes out, and then in the passage of time attitudes develop, and the attitudes miss the original spirit. And what I've got here in mind is our relationship to the body. And I think particularly the kind of age and culture that we are living in at present, the incredible stereotyping, men and women and factors, beauty of course, or handsome would be one, energy, would be another, health would be another, appearance would be another. And how, from the immediacy of seeing someone, the physical form of somebody, and of course that will possibly mirror and reflect something in the inner life, how quickly the mind rushes to judgment. We see somebody, what we see is the form. We perhaps have never spoken to her nor him, have no contact, no whatever. We just see. Or perhaps we just hear. All of us who've been on silent retreats will know this one extraordinarily well. If you haven't been ever on a silent retreat, it's forgive the advertising, keeps me in work. If you've ever been on a silent retreat, you will know well what goes on in the silence, what emerges. And it's not at all unusual, say, on the circumstances of a retreat. In the silence, the eye's attention goes to the other. We call it VRs in the Vipassana romances. And the mind, once it alights upon the other, only has the form, never spoken, never seen the person before in their life. Once the mind alights upon and takes hold of, it's extraordinary what the inner life can do with that perception. And that the two people only, in all the occasions of going into the meditation hall and leaving their sandals outside, and occasionally the two pairs of sandals are together. It's a confirmation of our cosmic connection, etc. The two people are standing behind each other in the queue for the food. Probably happens here over the Buddhafield Cafe. Standing behind each other, and one's got really strong feelings towards the other, who one doesn't know, never seen before, just observed, etc. And the inner life is confused and nervous and excited, and if the person's holding a plate and knife and fork, the knife and fork is bouncing around on the plate there, etc. And this poor other person has no idea that this is going on. I have the privileges of being a Dharma teacher, and it's true. I remember in one situation, a guy came and he said to me in the one-to-one, to Christopher, I'm really having a lot of projections about one of the women on the retreat, and she's really occupying my meditations. And so I have the privilege of I always want to know, well, who? and the guy says, well, I'd rather not say, and sometimes I'm a little bit brutal. So you're not willing to be open, etc. So one of the guys said to me, and I asked, and he said, gave the good woman's name. I said, there's just one thing, and we discussed. And just before he left the room for the one-to-one, it's true, I said to him, I just want to mention one thing. There are 11 other guys on this retreat with the same projection about the same woman. Can't all be cosmic. All right. So sometimes there is the inner life. Pleasant feelings arise. Picture arises. Yes, some thoughts arise. And we need to be, not to reject that, not to dismiss that, but to be mindful of that movement, to recognize the humanness, shall we call it, of that movement. But to see from that, if we make more of it, if we project more, if we demand more, all of that extra to that feeling and that perception is a recipe for trouble. Disappointment, feelings of failure, fault finding with the other. So our inner life, in a movement of feeling, perception, and the view, the human element, and the mindfulness of the Buddha is to watch the unhealthy, unhelpful extra that goes with it. There. If, on the element of the body for the moment, the encouragement in the teachings in relationship to this is one in which the considerations that we have, three rather important ones. One is posture. Second is diet. And third is exercise, the movements of the body. And much of the ill health of human beings, apart from hereditary and genetic factors, quite often can mean there is some neglect of 1, 2, or 3 areas with regard to diet. And all I can say in terms of mindfulness with regard to diet, please, as much as possible, be mindful of the degree of the 3 deadly elements, amongst the many, but the 3, sugar, salt, and fat. And our diet is often overloaded with these 3. And a human being being mindful as much as possible from the standpoint of health and well-being will really look at these 3, and there are clearly alternatives. With 1, 2, or 3, the simple Buddhist one, give them up. Renunciation, letting go. If that's a step too far, real moderation for your welfare. Similarly with posture and with exercise. It's just lovely to see so much movement going on at Buddhafield, but we need to keep that vitality alive. The body needs the sense of aliveness, and its movement is important. Unfortunately, the Buddhist tradition, bless its heart, has had, in contemporary expression, has given very little real attention to movement. The traditional form for it there is walking, is the yatra. And I remember my old teacher, he would take us, sometimes we'd just be getting into our meditation practice in the monastery, we'd just be sitting, finally got a decent posture, finally the mind wasn't wandering to sex or something else, and being in the moment or whatever, and then he'd say, you get up one morning and say, we're going on a yatra today. Oh, come on. Just getting into my sitting meditation. And off we'd go there. And sometimes 100 plus, single line, silent, walking barefoot, by the way. He wanted us to have a close contact with the earth. Sun of the head, the shaved heads, the softer monks like me, of course, he'd be at the front, so he'd put the robe on top. If it was on the pavement, you'd step on the side and walk on the grass. And occasionally he'd turn round and look, see which monks and nuns were the wimps, etc. But I just use it as a small example of the beauty and the power of just walking. Just what we have yatra. Actually, I leave tomorrow to go to France on the train for our French yatra. And on that, there are 100 adults, 20 kids there, long silent walks, talks, lots of sharing and music and theatre and poetry and much, much else. And out of all the dynamics of that, which is precious and beautiful, a few people here I know, that relationships get formed. People share a lot, have a time to really listen and connect with each other. Deep friendships, deep relationships, love relationships. And sometimes I say it's a Dharma yatra, but it's also a DDA, Dharma dating agency. I heard there was one here. Anyway. So the dynamics of that all requires mindfulness. The willingness to be mindful for the heart, for insight, for understanding there. Because in the inner life, what is most precious of all is listening deep to inwardly to the messages from the deep, capital D, in the language of the Buddha here. So in our calm and in our mindfulness moments, with real attentiveness to the inner, we can hear the voice of the deep. And it's the voice of the deep which moves us. It's the voice of the deep which brings insight. It's the voice of the deep which brings inspiration. It's the voice of the deep which can come from the community. I mean, just to give you a very small example, and this is not unusual. I just wonder, how many people here have been to India? Got a load of India wallahs around there. And it's happened quite often, I have to say, that I've had a conversation with a person, and I've said to the person, have you been to India? And she or he said, no, I've never been. I said, I think you should go. Just go. And the person has replied, I've thought about it a lot. Because the thought did not lead to an action, it wasn't from the deep. And I've been waiting for somebody to tell me to go. Now I'm going to go. And I've been teaching in India every year, last 40 years, so know the rhythms. And in that connection with the Sangha, sometimes the deep requires the voice of the other. Somebody says something to us, it touches the deep. The deep opens us up. The great task of great therapists and great counselors and great social workers and great psychologists and great mindfulness teachers, that in the communication that takes place or in the practice, everything is to be receptive to the deep. That's what it's about. And as I say, sometimes, we just read a line of poetry. We just hear a phrase. We just miraculously come to a Dharma talk with Christopher and hear something. And sometimes a word, a phrase, a sentence, a theme, it touches the place. And something responds. And we want to be interested in the deep, which moves the life to love, which moves the life to compassion, to wise action. And as I say, the Sangha, all of us, with teachers and practitioners, all of us, actually need each other, because sometimes we just say something to the other. We get the sense that she or he or they are receptive. We just say something and it just touches the spot. Wow, that's right. Wow, that's clear. Wow, I really needed to hear that. Wow, thank you. And those precious things from the deep brings something out. And it's so different from the reactive mind. The whole feeling quality is different. The harsh judgments, the feelings, I'm not good enough. The view, my mother didn't love me enough. The view, I never get anything right. That's not to do with the deep. That's memory. That's the old. That's the habitual way of thinking. And our practice for realization and for liberation of love and liberation of mindfulness in a way is not to believe nor identify those voices, negative, hostile, undermining, projecting, because that interferes with the voice of the deep. And our silences, our meditations, our practices, our sharings, our being together, and our listening to each other. And when they used to see the followers of the Buddha, he set up, it all became form with the robes and all that stuff, I remember when two of the monks came to visit my parents, you know what I mean, about 11 o'clock at night. I said, if you're in, I was a monk, if you're in England, go and go and stay in my parents' place, you know, etc. So they lived in, you know, unforgettable house in Croydon or somewhere. And forgettable. And so I knocked on the door there, and my parents always had foreign students staying in their house. So once because my parents couldn't stand each other, basically, so they would get in foreign students, so they didn't have to shout so loud at each other. It's true, I mean, and so two monks turned up at the door about 11 o'clock at night, and one young German student opened the door, and he came down to my mother and said, "There's two men at the front door, dressed up in orange curtains." It's slightly fancy, anyway. So sometimes in the views, in the perceptions there, that let's know ourselves well enough to know the unhealthy, unwise, unskillful, judgmental voice inside of ourselves. And let's really listen to each other, because it may only take a word or a sentence or a phrase or something to really register and say, thank you. I needed to hear that. And what's important, finally, in the communication, I find, and and probably you do, that when you and I are under attack, you go to the office, you go and see your parents, or your kids, or friends, or whoever it might be, and he or she is really in an angry, blaming mood. And there's a lot of this resentment, as we know, around. And that person then launches into a vitriolic attack upon us. You, with the finger pointing, of course, you know, and the various blame and accusations. I find, and possibly you do too, there may be truth in it, but I can't hear it. I can only feel the attack, the blame, and the fault finding. And if the person has enough clarity and can speak from the deep, which is without the blame, one can communicate, one can say things there which are not easy to say, and there is much more opportunity and possibility that the other will hear, can listen. But I can't hear it if I'm being blamed and rubbished and put down and attacked. That's all I pick up. So if I want truth to move, if I want truth to be a liberating force, if I want truth to wake us up, then the truth has to be accompanied with mindfulness, with love, with interest, with empathy, and then we can speak a truth, an authentic truth, and it has much more chance of registering because the truth has got love with it. And it's heard much more easily. Not only is it destructive and negative for ourselves, negativity eats up happiness, it's a virus, it eats up all joy in the inner life. But also, it's a lousy strategy for communication. Blame, fault-finding, putting down, rubbishing is just hopeless for us human beings. It just doesn't work. So if we're interested in truth, then listening to that voice, and it's not that we become nice, sweetie, non-judgmental Buddhists, much as I love, but we're staying true to something. We're willing to listen. And in the time of the Buddha, as I mentioned, when people saw those who loved the Buddha's teachings, they were called Shravakas. It literally means the ones who listen. It was a teaching emphasizing the power and the beauty of listening. And sometimes we listen. I was just in Mumford, in the Buddhafield Cafe over there, and they were playing a CD, and a rock band came on. With this rock band, I have to say, I am like this. I mean, hear me. Mumford and Sons. I am such a fan of this band. And a couple of years ago, let me go off on a tangent here. I'll get back to mindfulness, but other things too. I was sitting on the couch with my grandson. He was about 10 years of age, as I do every year, watch the Glastonbury Festival, the music. I'm just sitting there. Suddenly, Mumford and Sons, who I never even heard of, and I went, wow, Kai, my grandson, they are amazing. And straight away, next day, YouTube, everybody, wow. And so sometimes you listen to music. Yeah. And even Mick, beloved Mick, Sir Mick, Mick the Jagger, Mick the Lips, the Mick I'm talking about there. He would spend a little time in a Buddhist monastery, bless his heart, in Laos. And he and many others have some wonderful lyrics. And I noticed, listening to Mick, the only thing he and I have in common is that we're the same age. And I thought, gosh, he saved his two Buddhist songs for the last two songs at Glastonbury. I thought, thank you, Mick. Bless you, Mick. One, of course, classic masterpiece. I can't get no satisfaction. I mean, how Buddhist can you get? Etc. And then the other one is, you can't always get what you want. Wow, Mick. I mean, this is teaching at another level, I have to say. So I say sometimes we just listen. We pick up a line. Our beloved Shakespeare, who's the master. And if anybody around the world, you ask many people who's had the privilege of an education, say any line from Shakespeare. And quite often in that beautiful iambic meter, pentameter, people say, yes, to be or not to be? That is the question. And how is it that profound question, and it's one of the most profound questions of life, it's resonated for millions and millions of people from generation to generation, to be or not to be. How beautiful it is just to be mindful of that question and say, well, what's my response? To be what? Not to be what? What does that mean? What does it mean for me as a human being? Thank you for listening. Thank you.